So welcome back to Interview Snaps. So thank you very much for joining us. I am very excited to be joined by Brent Nally, who is, you're involved in so many things, it's hard to know where to start, but you're the host of Lifespan News. You are the CEO and co-founder of the Longevity Plan. You're also very involved in Bitcoin, I know. And so also very quickly, if you're watching this, please do give a like and give a subscription. It really helps out the channel. No, thanks a lot for your time. I guess the place to start would be, when did you first get involved in kind of the longevity movement?
I first got interested in longevity when I read a book called The Singularity is Near when I was in college. I believe it was in 2006. And so then I started, that book, if you're familiar with it, you understand how it kind of changes your whole perception of reality to a certain extent, talking about, the singularity that Ray Kurzweil says will happen around 2045. I'm not really a religious person at all. And I'm also not really in the singularity religious type camp either, because a lot of those people I think are somewhat religious. But that book got me really interested in that stuff, and I still follow a lot of the singularity movement and the community. And then I started watching lectures of Aubrey de Grey back in the day when YouTube was very early, around 2007 or so, when Aubrey de Grey was doing TED Talks and some other lectures. And I was like, this is a very interesting fellow. If you guys aren't familiar with Aubrey de Grey, he's kind of like one of the unofficial leaders of longevity science, geroscience, the study of aging. He's got a big beard and long hair. Great guy. He's a scientific advisor for our longevity plan company, and I've interviewed him a couple times. Once on Leaf's YouTube channel. You mentioned I host Lifespan News. Leaf is the parent of Lifespan News. Leaf stands for the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation. They're a great 501c3 nonprofit that I volunteer for. I volunteer to host Leaf and do other things. I just think they're a great organization. So that just kind of got me interested in it. My grandmother was withering away at the time, around 2005, 6. She finally passed in 2007 at the age of like 81 after having chronic emphysema, COPD, from smoking her whole life since she was like 13. She had Parkinson's. She was on 8 medications at once. And I just got me thinking, like, is this normal? Is this how it always was for hundreds of thousands of years? Turns out it isn't. We're gotten much better over the last few hundred years and 100 years of keeping people alive, but we're trying to extend healthy lifespan. That's really, really key. So a lot of people miss that when they start learning about longevity. They think that we're talking about keeping you old, keeping you alive in an old, decrepit state. That's actually not what we're talking about, and it's not scientifically possible. So it turns out what all we're really trying to do with longevity is keep you as healthy as possible for as long as possible. And the byproduct of that is that you just tend to raise your probability of living longer. So that's the idea.
I mean, let's say you must have been involved for quite a while. It's funny you mentioned Aubrey. I had him on the channel, I think it was last year. And rather than saying, I said, I think longevity, no, I said longitudinal escape velocity rather than longevity escape velocity. And I've been so embarrassed. I've just never been able to contact him since. But I mean, like, how's the movement changed in the time you've been involved with it? Has it got a lot more mainstream, a lot more kind of, mainstream attention?
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot, and it's definitely gone a little bit more mainstream. There was an article in the New York Times just a couple of days ago. We're recording right here on, what is it, May 5th, right?
Is it fifth or is it
May
fourth?
May 4th. Today's May
One
4th.
of
Yeah,
them.
today's May 4th, 2021, and it's, I think, just a couple of days ago a news article came out in the New York Times. I read it. There's some good stuff in there. It's kind of like the Streisand effect, the Barbara Streisand effect, where it's like all news is good news, because there was a lot of stuff in there I disagree with. But hey, New York Times has a big audience, so I'm glad they're writing articles about it. But to answer your question more directly, it's changed a lot. And I've just been in the industry about 2 years full time. My story is I developed a plan that I wanted to get financially free and independent first. And then I figured I could do whatever I want as an entrepreneur in longevity and not be beholden to some, big company or something, because it's a real problem of how to get involved in longevity. We have more options now than ever with podcasting, like what you're doing, and all sorts of other options. But a lot of people feel trapped. They want to get involved, but they don't know how to contribute, and they're not in a financial situation where they can just, quit their jobs and work full time. So I developed a plan, a long-term plan over about a decade to get financially free. And then my wife and I, we quit our jobs, sold our home in the San Francisco Bay Area. I quit my job at LinkedIn, which is a subsidiary of Microsoft. And we then traveled the world in 2018 before we wanted to have our first kid. My wife got pregnant February of 2019, or yeah, 2019, had the baby in November 2019. She's a COVID baby. My son, who's 17 months right now, is a COVID baby, because he was born like right when
That's
COVID-19.
yeah, that's got to be quite the age.
Yeah, like supposedly right when it started, November of 2019 is right when he was born. He was
Has
born
he met
November.
other human beings yet, or is he sort of just aware of the concept?
He's met other human beings, but it's been challenging. I wouldn't recommend having a baby in a pandemic. You know, that old saying they say, it takes a village to raise a baby. Well, we didn't have a village. It's not a sob story. I know COVID-19 impacted everybody a lot in many different ways, but we moved out here away from the San Francisco Bay Area, about half hour east of Sacramento, to a town called El Dorado Hills. And we did that to be closer to my wife's parents for childcare, but then they didn't want to see us because they're in their late 60s and COVID, and until they're both now fully vaccinated. But we also have my wife's grandmother who moved out here with us in the assisted facility. She's 96, so we didn't want them to get it or us to get it and then give it to her, because that could potentially wipe her out very quickly at 96. So that's kind of my story there. And then I started interviewing longevity experts and enthusiasts and people who I've been following, reading their books and following their content for many years. I started doing that right when we got back from traveling the world in 2018. We went to Southeast Asia for about 3 months in 2018, traveled to US, going to 25 states in the summer of 2018, and then traveled Europe for a few months. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going full into longevity. Interviewing people helped me educate myself about the real problem, where the disagreements are, what problems really need to be solved, where the opportunities are. And so then I wanted to show like Lifespan News to exist for many years. Nobody did it. So I partnered with Leaf. The president and co-founder of Leaf, the Life Extension Advocacy Foundation, is Keith Comito. He's a great guy. And so we partnered up for me to host Lifespan News. We started doing that in July of 2020. It's a weekly show, comes out every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 noon. 12 noon Eastern. And we just, released this week's episode a couple hours ago. And so I've been doing that show every week, except for the last week of December. 2020, we took a week off for Christmas, but we've been doing it every week since then. And then I co-founded Longevity Plan, and I'm the CEO there. And we're building out our scientific advisory board and our business plan and raising funds, and really excited about what we have in store for Longevity Plan. So I just talked a lot, but I hopefully answered
No,
one
it's
of your
very
questions.
interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's kind of interrelated, but because I say one thing I'm always very interested when I talk to longevity advocates is how much progress they think they've seen. Because you speak to a lot of people and they think it's all a bit pie in the sky, but when you actually get kind of show them crystal progress. So kind of in the 10 years, which obviously isn't very long, but also that you've been involved, have you seen real scientific progress that kind of reassures you we're heading in the direction you'd expect us to be heading in?
Oh, 100%. We've seen an incredible amount of scientific progress from one perspective, but from another perspective, not enough. So
Yeah.
I'll share in a little bit more in depth what I mean. So what I mean is that when I read Singularity is Near in like 2006, and I'm 36 years old right now, chronologically, I was born in 1985. So let's go back to 2006. I'm 21 years old. I have less life experience. I just think I kind of bought it kind of like a religion with the Singularity is Near. It's like, oh, this is just going to happen. I don't really have to do anything. And that's not the case. I don't think. It might be, but I'm not willing to just sit back and relax and let this stuff happen. I wanted to get involved because over the many years that I followed the science, I noticed that things were not happening as quickly as I was hoping that they would when I was 21 years old. So we've had on the other end of that perspective, we had the Hallmarks of Aging groundbreaking paper that come out in 2013 that has withstood the test of time in the last 8 years since 2013, which shows 9 hallmarks of aging, and those kind of get disputed with Aubrey de Grey, who's been talking about 7 major reasons why we age. The
Yeah.
hallmarks of Asian says they're 9. Basically, they dispute over some nerdy geroscience differences. But the point is that the longer time ticks along, the more these things seem to be very clear. And so then from an investment standpoint, seeing that we are understanding the process of aging, not just in humans, but in other organisms, it really, from an investment standpoint, gives confidence that, okay, we can actually build businesses and services to help people. And so I'd say within the last 5 years, dating back to maybe 2015, 16 ish, we've seen a rush of VCs, real monies, plus,
Okay.
coming into the longevity industry. And plus the fact that we're in a booming, market and have been for so many years. Financial markets has helped because a lot of people have gotten wealthy multi-billionaires and so say, well, what do I want to do with this money? So, and Aubrey de Grey agrees on with me on that. We talked about that in my interview in his office in July of 2019 as well. So hopefully that answers your question at the high level from a scientific perspective, and then also from kind of a business, financial investment, venture capital perspective as well.
So, I mean, is that basically your experience with, because the longevity plan, did that launch quite recently, I think, that's my understanding?
So the history of longevity plan is we first had the business idea. My co-founder at the time was Vladimir Trofanov, who's in Russia. He is the CIO of a one of the largest financial institutions in Russia called Veribank, and one of their subsidiaries. He's the CIO for them. And so then we partnered up and created a company called LEV Sciences, LEV, standing for Longevity, Escape, Velocity. And we had an idea of just helping out the scientists achieve their goals quicker with their lab reagents, kind of like the Craigslist of that was one of our major business models to help them, buy, share, you know, whatever, their equipment, because a lot of this equipment is really, really expensive. That was a difficult business model. And so we shut down. And also the name wasn't great. Lev Sciences. It's very esoteric. So one thing that I've learned is that we really, really need to get better at communication to a greater audience. As we've talked about, we need to make longevity mainstream. And to do that, we need to use the language that I was kind of using earlier of just explaining to people, this is just trying to keep people as healthy as possible. That's all we're actually really trying to do. And who can't get behind that? I mean, that's what the whole healthcare system should be based off of. Um, Aging is the foremost risk factor for morbidity and mortality of COVID-19. I mean, I literally figured this out in about 12 minutes of Google searching in January of 2020. Now, some people might not believe me on that, but I have like ways to verify that. Yet this wasn't like mainstream and well known. And the CDC actually just came out with an article or a report a few weeks ago that listed the top 11 more factors for COVID-19, risk factors for morbidity, and aging wasn't even one of them.
Yeah.
So it's just kind of sad in that perspective. And the geroscience community and all of the people involved, even the leaders, Aubrey de Grey, David Sinclair, and many others, we've essentially failed in communicating this message to the mainstream audience. So I think that effective communication with our language and our persuasion is really, really important. This is why Aubrey de Grey goes on tons of podcasts and interviews like my channel and your channel, and not writing a book again, because he sees the internet and podcasts as being the way that people are learning and the way that people are continuing to. So he's trying to get into as many different type of podcasts and influence as many people as possible, so that people can get educated, and then they can get their governments essentially to demand the governments to make change in policy and in investment. Because I personally believe that if we just redirected funding to studying and researching biorejuvenation and aging, how we actually slow, stop, and reverse aging in humans and other animals, if we shifted that focus and funding away from things of diseases of aging like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and cancer that we've just dumped insane billions amounts of money in the last few decades and haven't really made that much progress. If we shifted that focus, I think that we could make considerable progress on figuring out what slows, stops, and reverses human aging within a short period of time. So a lot of people ask, when will this happen? I say, you're asking the wrong question. Life is about asking the right questions. And the right question is, what are you doing to help it happen faster?
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm trying to do. So hopefully that was a long-winded way of kind of answering your question too, James.
I mean, it's very weird in the sense that, when coronavirus came along, for example, obviously, every scientific institute in the world, every government in the world is putting money into fighting it. And it really very effectively, because within a year they had, well, a little over a year, I suppose, they had a working vaccine, but they've got various other treatments. I mean, well, they've got a whole bunch of working vaccines, but with something like aging, because it's kind of seen as natural, as part of the human experience, there doesn't seem to be the same sort of political energy towards fighting it. I mean, beyond kind of changing public opinion, what can we do to change that? I mean, is it like lobbying politicians, or could there be like sort of one big scientific breakthrough which finally makes people think, yeah, there's something to this?
I think it could be both. We could have one big scientific breakthrough that could change everything quickly. The protein folding problem that was solved by AlphaFold, which is a subsidiary of Google's DeepMind, that solved that they created AlphaGo years ago, and they beat the best Go player in 2016. They leveraged that team and that technology and that experience to create AlphaFold. There's been a protein folding problem known for decades, and there's been a contest since I believe 1994, every 2 years, to award a prize to a team that could figure out how proteins fold, and this Google DeepMind AlphaFold did that, and it kind of took a lot of the whole global scientific community by surprise, not just the aging community. So if we can have more breakthroughs like that in artificial intelligence, machine learning, AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is kind of the wet dream of AI researchers, essentially. That term AGI, artificial general intelligence, was created by a few people. Ben Gortzel, who I've interviewed on my Brent Nally channel, and who is also a scientific advisor for our longevity plan company. And then Peter Voss, who we interviewed on my longevity YouTube channel. It's a separate channel where we've interviewed a bunch of people in 2020 with some other friends of mine, Alex Kotoff, Max Anderson, and Rowan Horn. We all kind of interviewed them together. And so, yeah, with Ben Gortzel, if you don't know who he is the founder of Singularity.net. He's on the board of Humanity Plus. He is the co-creator of Sophia the Robot with David Hansen. They created Sophia at Hansen Robotics. Sophia the Robot, you probably know her. If you don't, definitely pause
I've
and
heard of
Google
it.
her,
Yeah.
right?
I saw Ben at what was it, Transvision London in 2019, and he gave it a really really good talk, which is also on my YouTube channel somewhere. Although very badly shot from sort of right at the back of the talk, and you can sort of vaguely make out as a bloke with long hair at the front. But yeah, I mean, I kind of come at this from a slightly weird angle. So I've got no scientific background at all. My background is in history and in politics. So I used to work for an MP, and I kind of became, and the reason I became very interested in scientific questions, it became pretty clear to me that the big political questions, well, the big scientific questions are going to become the big political questions. So things like, what are we going to do when we have radically enhanced AI, which is more intelligent than humans in across multiple areas? What does that mean for democracy, or our systems of government? I mean, that's kind of how I came to it, which I know is a slightly unusual route. And that's also why I'm constantly kind of asking about getting kind of political people involved. I mean, in terms of kind of the technologies which are coming on, is there kind of anything in particular that you're really excited about, or really watching closely?
Yeah, well, I just mentioned the AlphaFold. I'm really excited about, that team there at Google, the DeepMind team, to see if they can come up with any other, rabbits out of their hat type, technological innovations. Um, you have Calico also at Google that was founded in 2013. I got really excited about them. They're, trying to tackle the problem of human aging. But as I interviewed Aubrey in July of 2019 in his office, we basically agreed that at that time, and I pretty much agree right now, that Calico, for all intents and purposes, and is essentially a dumpster fire, from what we were hoping it would be in 2013. I mean, Calico, with all the resources of Google, went out and hired a bunch of geroscientists and aging researchers from institutions, a lot of academics, brought them to Calico, gave them the Silicon Valley, higher salaries and benefits and stuff. They haven't really accomplished much that I know of. If they have accomplished something, then please somebody message me and let me know what they've accomplished. Because if they have, then they're keeping it all secret. So it's kind of unfortunate. But there's a lot of exciting things going on in longevity. It's actually really hard to keep up with. So I, do this full time every single day, and I go to sleep every night just being like, all right, Brent, turn it off, get some sleep. Sleep is really important. I never go to sleep thinking like, oh man, like I'm bored. What else is there to
Yeah.
do? There's always, it's really exciting. There's a lot of things going on. So that's why, I personally put in a lot of work in the lifespan news every week to condense it all in like to an 8-minute video for you guys to watch and keep up with the science. So I would recommend people to do that to keep up with the mainstream science. If there's a story that we haven't covered in lifespan news, then you can, always contact us and let us know. But most of the time, the reason why we don't do that is because a lot of stuff out there is just, snake oil still, unfortunately. We got to be really careful because there's literally millennia of snake oil and charlatans that we're battling still to this day, to make sure that we're giving people correct information about the science of aging.
Yeah, I kind of feel that the movement still struggles with that in a sense. It struggles to differentiate itself from the less serious people. So whenever I say to friends, "Hey, I'm interviewing someone about radical life extension today," they sort of look at me like I've lost the plot slightly. Obviously, I know that Ulrich Gray is a very reputable scientist, but for kind of like someone who's not aware of the background, it's possibly hard to tell the difference between him and a sort of someone on the internet who's got a blog who's saying that we're going to live to 1 million because of X.
Right.
Um, I mean, I suppose the solution to that is, I mean, you've already touched on this, but as longevity becomes more mainstream, and it becomes more respectable, and perhaps as some sort of scientific breakthrough comes through, well, we can make a really clear distinction between what is serious scientific work and what is, the crankery that we've seen for the past couple of thousand years, or since humans have been evolved, to be honest.
Well, my take on that is that a couple things. Number one, I always reference the movie Idiocracy. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out. It's a fantastic movie, and if you don't have time to watch it, then just type in Idiocracy into YouTube, and the first 4 minutes of the movie will pop up, and watch that, and that will explain a lot of what actually is going on right now. That movie came out in 2006. It's directed by Mike Judge, who's the creator of Beavis and Butthead and the TV show King of the Hill. Also, another movie that was a favorite of mine, um, Office Space from the late 90s. And he also is the creator of the show on HBO called Silicon Valley, which I love that show too.
I've heard of that.
So Mike Judge is a genius, and he did this movie in 2006 called Idiocracy with Luke Wilson, who's the brother of Owen Wilson, and then Maya Rudolph they're the two like main characters. And basically, they go in some government cryopreservation secret project that went wrong, and the government little project people that were running it secretly and corruptly. So they were supposed to be woken up in a year to test that cryopreservation actually works, which is funny because it ties into life extension, because there's a big cryopreservation movement within life extension.
Yeah.
And so because the people who were running it kind of got arrested or removed from higher up people in the government, they stayed cryopreserved for 500 years, and then they woke up in a avalanche of trash, because the whole world's turned into idiocracy, because basically you have all the dumb and uneducated people having tons of babies, and the smart and educated people and wealthy people are not having enough kids. Extrapolate that out over generations in 500 years, and you have a society of idiocracy. I see that happening more and more and more. So it ties into your question of like, why do not more people not know about this? Because the science is real and it's exploding. Why are more people not getting interested in this? The only answer I have is poor communication on our end, people in the movement, and then idiocracy. People should be interested in this stuff, because if you're alive and you have a pulse, and if you care about staying healthy, then you should be trying to figure out all the latest science on the ways to do that.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned obviously that it's become much easier to get funding. I mean, I would say that most people would like to live a longer, healthy life. I think that's a standard position to take. Sorry, you see me? Sorry, it's pretty close briefly. But I think that most people would like to live a longer, healthier life. So obviously, if you're a mega rich individual, then one of the most practical things you can do, I mean, to kind of common sense thing you can do is to pump money into this kind of research, because what have you got to lose, basically? Is that the kind of conversation you're having with people?
Unfortunately, no. Common sense would tell you that that would be the case, and that's what I used to think. But there's a saying: "Why do they call it common sense if it's not very common?" So, unfortunately, I get a lot of pushback from a lot of people, mainly on the internet, mainly in chatting, texting, not verbal communication. Now, I'm a corporate communication major. And one of the things that I learned in my corporate communication degree is that communication is about 70 to 80% or so nonverbal. So, if you're looking at my face right now and you can see my expressions and stuff and my hand gestures and things like that, this is all nonverbal communication. On top of that, from the verbal perspective, you have tone and inflection in my voice and things like that, which you can, sense. That's how you pick up on sarcasm and stuff.
Yeah.
When I'm messaging with people about longevity in a text format on the internet, there's a lot of people out there who have a lot of negative programming, negative beliefs. They've been pumped into their brain from our society that's taught them all the wrong things about aging. And I mean wrong from a science perspective, wrong from a philosophical and just psychological perspective. And so communication is really, really the key here, because a lot of people don't want to live a lot longer and healthier. At least that's what they say. A lot of people are really depressed. A lot of people are upset. There's a lot of corruption in the world. The internet and media is bringing out the truth of a lot of this corruption, of how corrupt our history and establishments have been for millennia, decades, centuries, and decades. And it's a lot for people to cope with. A lot of people are just going through the stage of just figuring this out. Now, I kind of figured this stuff out when I was in high school, because I was an early internet adapter.
Yeah.
And a lot of people thought I was crazy when I talked about the Federal Reserve System and central banking, how this stuff actually works. I was a mortgage broker, my first job out of college in 2000, 2007, and 8, as the whole economy was crashing because of the mortgage industry. I watched the company I was at just crumble. So I have a unique perspective. That's what led me into being an early adapter, a relatively early adapter to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. But we can get to that stuff later. But my point, staying on my point, is that a lot of people do not see it that way, unfortunately. And so we have to kind of meet them where they're at and speak in their language and try and get people to understand. Again, like I've said, this whole movement of longevity is really just about keeping you as healthy as possible. And then we'll see what happens. The overpopulation stuff, we just on our Life Extend Show channel last week did an episode on overpopulation, and it's the first episode of a whole series on overpopulation. So I'd encourage people to check that out, because if you are just learning about this, then it can be really complex. But then people ask the same questions over and over and over again when they're first learning about this. And so the more educated you become, the better that you can handle answering these types of questions.
Well, I suppose to an extent, the longevity community is almost fighting, several thousand years of propaganda, in the sense that, from obviously all of human existence, even now, but we're just about getting to the point where we can possibly see beyond it. But it's been standard that you'll die in, probably 60, 70 years at most, and that's if you're lucky. And obviously, as a result, we've come up with all sorts of mechanisms for coping with that. Obviously, a lot of the main world religions incorporate various solutions to that. So considering kind of what you're up against, thousands of years of human understanding, I mean, the counter argument is actually you guys are doing quite a good job. I mean, to have, to got to the point where we're having, these conversations where this is a serious discussion, it shows just how persuasive you are being.
Yeah, I agree. And it's context is key here, right? Because we're in the year 2021. We're having this conversation over Zoom. It's going to go on YouTube and maybe some other platforms and stuff, and maybe live in infamy, on the internet indefinitely. We're in very strange, exciting times. And, most people didn't live past the age of 25 or so on average was the life expectancy, a couple thousand years ago. And it's the progress of science, like antibiotics, and having improved the child infant mortality rates, has been huge just in the last 100 years to raise our life expectancy. But we really haven't extended maximum lifespan. So that is a scientific term. And so I think it's Jean Calment, or Jean Calment. I'm horrible at French, but she was a French lady who lived apparently to 122 years of age. There's some controversy over that, but I've looked into it pretty deeply, and I believe that she probably did. She died in 97, and that's what's generally believed to be in the mainstream geroscience scientific community to be the longest lived human at this time. But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we can't potentially extend that, because we've already extended a natural lifespan of many other model organisms. And we know enough about this Jeanne Calment lady. You know, she ate chocolate every day. At least she said that she did. She, you know, never had a job. She was married. She was able to ride her bike and paint and do pretty much whatever that she wanted every day. She was very optimistic. So if I can give the audience like some just simple advice, it's do those things, do what you love, you know, make sure that you are taken care of financially and that you're not struggling financially, but make sure you focus on what you're passionate about, do what you love, be an optimist. There's so much negative information coming at us all the time now with the mainstream media and social media, which in a way it's actually a good thing because now we're starting to figure out through the internet, through this global like connective consciousness with the internet, like what are the actual problems that we care about. And that's this constant huge conversation that we're having on the internet, but you can't let these negative perceptions overtake your consciousness and affect your biology in a negative way. You have to stay optimistic. It's really important for just health, but it's also important, you know, just to be successful, live a successful life, however you define success. So hopefully that helps answer the question.
I mean, I find that kind of one of the biggest debates within the longevity community is, you know, not about this kind of long-term stuff. It's about how can I extend my life or my lifespan and my health span now. So obviously lots of stuff about the various different, all sorts of different diets, people try all sorts of different supplements, that kind of thing. I mean, is that something that you recommend? Do you think there's something to this?
For what kind of diet?
Oh no, sorry, just I mean, any sort of diet. I said it's obviously all sorts of different kind of recommendations out there. Do you think there's anything to this, or do you just think that we're playing with small numbers?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely playing with small numbers, you know, in that sense. However, it doesn't mean that, you know, you might not want to play with those small numbers. So, you know, I try to eat a very personalized diet based off all the knowledge that I have gained over the years about my microbiome. I took my biome test for my wife and I in early March 2019 and did a video about it on my YouTube channel. So people can check that out if they want to learn more. We've interviewed the founder of Viome, VIOME, which stands for Victory of the Microbiome. His name is Naveen Jain, this billionaire, eccentric, very interesting, optimistic person. We interviewed him on my longevity channel. So I'm a big believer in the microbiome science. We'll see how it plays out. I'm not positive if Viome itself is, you know, legitimate as far as everything they're doing. I hope that they are. I want to believe that they are. And I think that Naveen Jain is working with the best intentions, but we're in the very early stages still of this, you know, microbiome science. But essentially, if you haven't heard of the microbiome, it's all of these non-human cells that make up your body. So our human bodies are made up of about 40 trillion cells. That's trillion with a T. And it turns out we have even more cells in our human body that are non-human, meaning they have non-human DNA in them. And those are, you know, our microbiome. And so there are all these other different types of organisms. So first of all, I think that's kind of weird and not talked about enough. We have more non-human cells in our body by number than human cells. Fascinating. But the microbiome turns out to be like very important for aging. So one of the things that's really exciting for aging and health. One of the things that's really exciting in the aging science that we should definitely talk about that we haven't yet, which is all these clocks, these aging clocks, where we're measuring different aspects of the body. So there's a microbiome aging clock now. Biomes developed their own, and there's some others. The best aging clock, in my opinion, is Grim Age, and it's named that because Grim, like the Grim Reaper, Grim Age is the best predictor of when you will die, of your mortality, and it's of any other single predictor. So even your chronological age, it's a better predictor. So the Grim Age measures your DNA methylation, which are, you know, methyl groups, and it's an algorithm that Dr. Steve Horvath at UCLA has pioneered and developed over the last little under a decade. I think 2011 or 12 or so is when he started doing this, and they've iterated and improved them. There's a company called My DNA Age where you can get the first DNA methylation clock Steve Horvath pioneered in 2013, but that one's really outdated. The Grim Age is going to become commercially viable and available hopefully soon, later this year. So that's something that we're going to be incorporated into my longevity plan company as soon as that's available. And we have partnerships with a company called the Clock Foundation, which is run by a guy named Bobby Brook, who's at UCLA in partnership with Dr. Steve Horvath. So the point here, I know I just said a lot, but to dumb it down for your audience, we need to actually figure out what slows, stops, and reverses human aging so that we can actually do more of that. And we still don't know very well, how do we slow, stop, and reverse human aging? And these aging clocks are going to be really important for us to figure that stuff out. So
Yeah.
hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, so one thing I find really interesting, I mean, obviously you went Ray Care as well, is sort of kind of the exponential nature of human progress. So, obviously go back thousands of years and bounce probability is very little is going to change in your lifetime. You might get a very slightly sharper spear or something. Whereas, I mean, say I'm 29, but just in my lifetime, things have changed radically. And I have no doubt that's going to continue. But it seems to me that sometimes people who are outside the scientific community and the kind of computing community struggle to quite get exponential growth. They think that they struggle to see the kind of the way that progress or almost human civilization is speeding up. I mean, do you think that's a fair summary?
Was your question, do I think that's fair?
Yes.
Okay. I thought that's what you said. I just want to make sure. So I do. And it's unfortunate because, look at this iPhone right here. You know, this
It's
thing
getting
that I have
merged
right
into the
here.
background a bit.
Yeah, sorry about that. So if I have my iPhone, one of the things that Ray Kurzweil has talked about in his lectures for years is that he wanted to go to MIT in the 1960s for college because they were one of the only universities or colleges that actually had a computer at all, a computer. And keep in mind, this computer was about the size of an entire room. It was massive. It cost about $10 million. And money back then, which adjusted for inflation is like, hundreds of millions of dollars or something like that at this point, because the dollar has been inflated so much since the 60s. Or maybe it's at least, 80 million or something like that. And that same computer, if you extrapolate out, decades from now, this iPhone or Android, smartphone that you have is about a million times faster, a million times smaller, and a million times cheaper in bips per dollars. So that's like crazy. And it's exponential technology and thinking that did that. So then if you wonder, what Ray Kurzweil talks about, and I don't know if this is true, I hope that it is. He has all these models that states his case of like all these very engineering technological progress models that he shows follow these very predictive curves. He says that basically by 2045, we're going to have that same type of exponential progress that I just described. And so by 2045-ish, which is currently, about 24 years from now, you'll have the technology that you have in your smartphone be about a million times smaller. So that would be like smaller than the size of a blood cell, a million times faster. That's going to be insanely powerful, and a million times cheaper in bits per dollar. So it'd basically be like, a fraction of a penny per each one of these little microcomputers that are smaller than your blood cell. You'll have maybe millions or billions or trillions of them inside of you, cleaning up everything and essentially keeping you alive indefinitely. Because one of the things that Albert de Grey talks about is that we are just machines, human beings, biology. He says we're incredibly complex machines, but just machines nonetheless. So it's his approach at SENS Research Foundation, Albert de Grey's company, which SENS stands for Strategies for Engineering Negligible Senescence, basically getting us to stay healthy and not age, stay biologically young indefinitely. He basically says that it's just a damage repair approach. You just repair the damage and keep the damage from occurring. Sounds even better to me. And if that sounds crazy to you, just in this morning, this episode of Lifespan News, we reported on a new fish. It's not a new fish, but we reported on a fish of a new study that apparently this fish doesn't seem to have any biological aging traits at all.
Really? What fish is that?
It's the buffalo bass mouth, I think. Watch
No.
Lifespan News from this morning.
No, I will definitely.
I didn't get enough sleep last night. My short-term memory is a little shot, but I think it's the buffalo basswater. Watch Lifespan News. So yeah, basically what they found is that this fish they studied fish from like very young that were like, I think just 1 or 2 years old, all the way to these fish that were 102 years old.
Yeah.
not only do they not show any signs of aging, but in many ways they're healthier. They get healthier as they get older, which is fascinating. There's an organism called Hydra, Hydra. You can Google it, read the Wikipedia about it. And this organism is fascinating. It has all these regenerative capabilities. It can be asexual, or it can reproduce itself. It can turn itself into like a hermaphrodite and have sex with itself to reproduce itself. You can cut it into pieces and it doesn't die. It just turns into, multiple, it just regrows and becomes multiple organisms of itself. It doesn't appear to age at all. So it lives, indefinitely. It's biologically immortal in that standpoint. I really don't like to use the word immortal,
Yeah.
but biological immortality is an actual scientific statement. And Hydra does appear to be biologically immortal, but keep in mind that does not mean that it just like is immune from death. It could still get a crazy disease that could kill it. It could still be victim to predation. Something could eat it or murder it, or humans, we could commit suicide, right? So the
Yeah.
point is that if we do become biologically immortal, if we do solve the human aging problem truly, and we can stay young and healthy, doesn't mean that you still can't get murdered or commit suicide or die from an accident. So people will still die, unfortunately. So that's why, I'm not just about solving the human aging problem. I've been a Tesla investor since 2012 because I think Tesla has the best chance to solve the whole driverless car problem, because we're losing about 3,000 people every single day to car accidents, which
Yeah.
is really sad because that's not just aging people. And then about another 150,000 people every single day are getting hurt in accidents that don't die. So if we can solve that, that's clearly an engineering problem. If we can make riding in a car as safe as riding in a plane, or a subway in a nice modern city that's safe, then that would save tons of lives. And I would say one final thing real quick. I'm a University of Kentucky born and bred basketball fan, born and raised in Kentucky. And one of our basketball players, who was just 19 years old, he had declared for the NBA draft. He was training out in Los Angeles a couple weeks ago. He was going to be a multimillionaire here in just a few months. He died in a car accident. He's gone. And it's really, really sad. So that really hit home to me, and it made me focus even more on Tesla and solving that problem. I think Tesla has a great strategy to do that. And I don't want to lose more. I'm not worried about overpopulation. If you
Yeah.
drive through the countryside, it's a big world out there. And I think Elon Musk is going to get us to Mars and the moon to set up a base there. So if you're worried about that, the whole overpopulation thing comes down to, the real question is, what is the carrying capacity of the earth, and how do we use technology to live as clean and healthy and in balance, in accordance with nature, and that's really the key right there. So people should focus on that. So long-winded answer again, James, but hopefully that answered your
That's very,
question.
very good. I mean, how do you think it will change human society? So, if we get to the position where either we are living, I mean, I'm not going to go to a huge length. Just to say, for example, we're living to 1,000, or we have the expectation we're going to live to 1,000. How do you think that would change us? Or would we become more risk averse? I mean, because obviously, the COVID pandemic has shown that some people are obviously very risk averse, and there's an illness that has I'd say, for certain age groups, sort of 0.5% chance of killing you. And if there are people who basically haven't left the house for a year, I mean, if we get to the position where, you have 1,000 years, but any risk you take is suddenly a huge risk because you've got a lot more to lose. How do you think that change how we live our lives?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And the easiest way that I could answer it is with a quote that Elon Musk says a lot. I'm a big fan of Elon Musk. I was a fan of Elon Musk before, like, being a fan of Elon Musk was cool. Now everybody, not everybody, some people hate him and stuff, but
Yeah,
he's blown up on the internet. But he always says the future is going to be weirder than you think. And that is like so true. The future is going to be super weird. And the biggest thing that I could give your audience to as advice, this is something that Ray Kurzweil has talked about, is the future is going to be owned by the people who have an ability to unlearn what they have learned and relearn new information quickly. And I'm a Star Wars fan, and you have Yoda, you must unlearn what you have learned, right? And that is really, really true. My last job at LinkedIn was in e-learning. We got acquired by a company. LinkedIn acquired a company called lynda.com that I was at. And I've been a lifelong learner myself. You have to keep learning. If you look at the wealthiest people on the planet, Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, they spend like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates at least say that they spend about 5 hours a day just reading, just taking in information. I'm constantly taking in information to try and figure out like what is the smart thing to do. So to tie it into answering your question, the future is going to be different than people think. It's going to be weirder than people think. And if people are going to be living longer and healthier lives, then it would make sense from a just, intelligent perspective for them to kind of change the risk factors that they're exposing themselves in the environment. So I say I don't really leave the house much. I'm kind of doing that more because I'm just building things on the internet and I can scale so much more on the internet. But sometimes I need to remind myself to get out and be more active and, go out and do more things in the real world. But it's been crazy. We've all been so conditioned in the last, I don't know, 16 months or so since COVID changed. And, it's even if it's beyond things that are beyond your control, where you really don't have the same environment outside of your home to leave and go to do the same things like eating at restaurants and going to a job and sporting events, whatever people did, however they lived their lives. A lot of those things have just changed. I used to play dodgeball and play in basketball leagues and be very active. All those leagues shut down. There's nothing I can really do. Even the park nearby with the basketball court, they had that roped off for a while. So I was like, man, the future is going to be weirder than you think, and people are going to adjust their decisions and behaviors based off new data and information that comes in, and especially the younger generations. Because as I get older, I'm 36. You say, James, you're 29. I mean, I've recently hired some babysitters, who are age 14 to 17 to come in to help babysit my son. And man, I mean, they're super with it with technology. They don't have a lot of the old programming and beliefs and experiences of things that I grew up with. So, they're very quick adapters to technology and the way that the world is. So, my advice is that just go with it, try and figure out how the world is changing, how technology is changing, and get ahead of the curve and stop fighting things that you're not going to win that battle. So that's how I try and think about the future in reality.
It's very interesting that you mentioned biological immortality. Obviously, there are some people who want to go, I suppose, beyond that is perhaps one way of putting it, but they want to make us not reliant on one body. So I'm thinking mind uploading, that kind of stuff. I mean, is that something you're interested in, or do you think that's starting to get a little bit into um, not quite science fiction, but we're just too far away from that to really worth having the conversation?
Yeah, I definitely think it's more the latter. I mean, it's okay to bring it up and touch upon it briefly, but I don't think it's like a productive to waste much time on that. And that's how I generally feel about some other types of things as well too. I also this will be controversial to some people and they won't like it, but I also feel that way about the cryopreservation stuff to a certain extent as well
Yeah.
too. Now I'm 36 years old, you're 29. If I was 70, I'd probably feel a lot differently. So I'm speaking more for myself. So I don't want the audience to take this in the wrong way. I don't want to disrespect anybody, but for me, I'm focused on solving the human aging problem, on helping develop and figure out technologies, biorejuvenation technologies to keep our body, this meat sack that we're stuck in, as young and healthy as possible, because I see that as something that's going to happen way sooner than mind uploading. Now maybe I'm wrong. I'll always reserve the right to be wrong, but I've thought about this stuff deeply and I've consulted with experts and things like that, and it seems to me much more likely that we're going to solve the human aging problem before we're able to upload our minds. I mean, it's a very deep philosophical conversation when it comes to the mind uploading, because who are you? We don't even understand what consciousness is. I've studied this in depth over many years, over a decade, and getting scientists to come to a consensus and agreement on what consciousness actually is and how it's created is extremely difficult, and we're not there yet. So if we can't even do that, then how are we going to upload minds? Is that you? Is it not you? So it's really deep philosophical things that we're probably not going to be able to figure out on this podcast, right, James?
I'm very interested in the arguments against longevity. And so we also when you speak to people about it. I mean, some people are very enthusiastic, but some people aren't. I mean, I think, as you said, partly it comes to a lot of people ill-informed, and/or they sort of think it's a little bit quackish, which once you get involved in the community, knows absolutely not the case. But I mean, well, probably the most common arguments are a, where are all the people going to live? Now, we know that's silly. There's a whole galaxy out there. That's not going to be a huge concern.
There's
But
a whole multiverse out there,
but-
probably. We're
well,
probably in a
quite.
multiverse. We're probably not even in this one universe. You know, there could be infinite amount of universes.
Quite, although that does lead to some terrifying philosophical conclusions. Um, but yes, but the kind of second reason is people often talk about that in some way death gives life a meaning. Now, I've never, it's not an argument I've ever subscribed to. I always find it very odd because you wouldn't invent aging, you wouldn't invent death. So you certainly wouldn't invent aging. You know, there's none of the problems where people talk about aging being the thing kind of useful for, like giving perspective in life and that kind of thing, and population control. You know, you wouldn't invent aging as a solution to any of those. But so lots of people do talk about it as kind of giving life a natural meaning. I mean, let's say, what's your kind of response to that?
Well, I will say that Nicola Bagala, who's the producer and stars in some of the episodes on our Life Extend show about our other science and advocacy videos that come out every other Monday at noon Eastern time, he just did a video about this where he kind of quoted some media, particularly Data from Star Wars, saying, you know, we're talking, I think the early 90s, next generation Star Wars, saying, I think Data was talking to Jean-Luc Picard, Patrick Stewart's character, and said, you know, Captain, death gives meaning to life. So that's what I was kind of talking about earlier, where it's our society that has programmed us with these negative and incorrect beliefs. And I think that it's because life has been so tough and difficult for thousands and thousands of years, you know, that we've had religions at the top of institutions. And so I think to keep people from going on with their daily miserable lives, you know, plowing in the fields, and they might look up and look at up their slave master and say, what the hell's the meaning of all this? You know what I mean? And it's like, that's a very difficult philosophical complex question, which, you know, the answer is actually, you know, you get to give meaning to your life. So the only meaning to life is that which you attribute towards it. But if you kind of go beyond that and think about like, well, what gives meaning to it? You could see how from an establishment standpoint, if you're at the top of the establishment, then you would say, well, death gives meaning to life. And then you can program people to believe that. But of course, death doesn't give meaning to anything. Death is just the end of
Yeah.
things. It's destroy. It's the destruction of information and people and stuff. So um, I just think it's silly. And I think that if you can have a legitimate conversation with people and they have an open mind, then they'll be converted and understand what I'm saying. But what I find is it's very similar to like the whole life extension debate with people online. A lot of people are just angry, they're upset, they're programmed with negative beliefs, they're depressed. And a lot of people are not coming from a place where they actually want to find the truth or the correct answer. They're just there to troll and to be negative. And so I'd say, you know, be around people that are in a growth mindset, that are positive, that are intelligent, and that have a track record of success. You know, you are kind of the 5 people that you spend the most time with is kind of who you become. They've done all sorts of studies on that to show that. So be around people either in a physical or virtual or both environment that are helping you grow and learn. Don't be the smartest person in the room. Make sure that you're you know, networking with people who are much smarter than you and, you know, have skills that you don't have that can benefit you is my advice. So if you think death gives meaning to life, that I will say from one perspective, because our lifespans have been so short for so much time, people think they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to die in 20 years. So I want to get this stuff accomplished before I'm done. Great. That can be great, motivating in that context for death give meaning life, but only in that context. Any other way, I don't buy the argument that death gives meaning to life.
And I mean, as we've said multiple times, you know, obviously death is something that humans have had to deal with since we evolved. And obviously, a lot of very complex ideologies have built up around that. So the various world religions. I mean, do you think that in some way the longevity movement is on an inevitable collision course with some of the major world religions, or do you think that they will adapt their beliefs in perhaps where they have other things?
I think it's both. And I think that a lot of times in life, when you're given an and or question, a lot of the times it's like a little bit of both. You know,
Yeah,
I think that the media and establishments, they're constantly trying to do like black or white, you know, yes or no. Whereas like reality is more gray. So I think that you're seeing both of those things already happen. If you look at the data, I've, studied world religions. So quick background on me, my mom's Jewish, my dad's Catholic, at least they were, raised that way. And they tried to raise me, my brother, and my sister that way. My mom was born in Manhattan, grew up more in the North. She's Jewish. She was a Democrat, and she got her master's in social work. My dad grew up, born and raised, lived his whole life in Kentucky. He was a Republican, for years. It doesn't subscribe to that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
Catholic, and he was a corporate attorney for, for something plus decades. He's about to retire later this year. So like sitting at the dinner table for me, my brother and my sister were kind of like watching a ping pong or a tennis match, like go back and forth between their different beliefs. But what it taught me was that all this religion basically is a bunch of BS at the top, that the things that it can't all be true. You can't have, right. And so I realized that as like a 4-year-old going to church on a Saturday morning and synagogue on a Friday night when I saw my rabbi and my priest using very specific language, like this is the way it is. Jesus is your Lord and Savior and blah, blah, blah. And then hearing something else. And so it's funny, like I was talking about before, how the young kids, they're coming up and they're adapting to technology in the world much faster because they don't have all the negative beliefs and the incorrect programming from the society. It's our culture that screws us up and that needs to change. It's the institutions that needs to change. And so the way that I answer your question a little bit more precisely is that, yes, these religions, global religions, will have to change and adapt, and they are. They know they need to do that to stay relevant. But you also see the trend that less and less people in Western and educated societies are religious, and that those numbers are plummeting because, of course, it's a bunch of silliness. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have good philosophical teachings and things in religion, and that churches can't do good things to help people and have food drives and help homeless people. I'm not saying any of that. I'm saying that when you say for a fact that certain things happen after life, when you can't possibly know that, and you're telling people that you do know that, you are a liar, and that's not good. So those are the things that we need to call out the BS, right? We need to live in more of a scientifically advanced and focused society on all aspects. So that is really important. We need to become a science-based species. Right now, we are not. I mean, we have science and we use science and technology to improve our lives in many ways, but we don't have a scientifically competent population, and that needs to change. We really need to teach STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math to our young kids. And China is doing that, and that's why China's GDP is growing rapidly. As much as I despise the communist Chinese party and the President Xi and certain things with the dictatorship is kind of scary, you can't deny, their focus on science, technology, engineering, and math, and how it's really advancing their economy and their whole culture.
Just one final thought before I kind of move on to Bitcoin. Do you think that in a few centuries, now obviously it's impossible to know what's going to happen in a few centuries because we've talked about the exponential growth of AI, and it's beyond the comprehension of any human. But in kind of a more general sense, I mean, do you think that people will look back on this period of time where we had a average life expectancy of sort of 75, 80, and where no one lived beyond 122, as kind of utterly barbaric, in much the same way that we look back on human sacrifice or the proportion of women dying in labour in the Middle Ages? Is that kind of your view, that people will look back and just go, what were they thinking? Or if not, what were they thinking? Because they probably understand why it's happening. They're sort of incredibly sorry for us.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's any other way to look at it. If you do, hypothetically, if we're talking about a situation where we are living indefinitely, if we are biologically immortal at some point in the future, the human species, then yeah, there's no really other way to look at it, because we're looking at, what we've already talked about in this podcast is looking at how life was a couple thousand years ago, where life expectancy was 25. I don't know, the more history you study, and not even that long ago, history from just like 100 years ago, life was tough, and life is still tough for a lot of people out there. Life is difficult for me and challenging in many ways because of what I'm trying to accomplish. But I have, access to clean water, toilet. I just moved into this brand new state of the art house last year with, great Wi-Fi and smart technology built into it and stuff. I got this ridiculously expensive microphone and we're on Zoom. Like, no complaints out of me because I have perspective. I think one of the things that people are missing in this day and age, in the social media world we're living in 2021, is perspective. Man, people, study history, study history. You have it so good. I would much rather be an incredibly poor person in America in 2021 than to be a king in Europe or France or England in the 16, 1700s. I mean, their life was miserable compared to what you could make your life right now if you're putting in the right information. So the final thing that I'll kind of say on this to tie it all together, what we were talking about before about, like, lifestyle, what can people do to live longer and healthier? Man, your mindset, your mindset is so freaking important. People are worried about what food they put in their body, and diet and exercise is the big thing. Who talks about what kind of information you put in your brain? That is way more important. So I would encourage people to make sure that they're putting the right information into their brain. They're protecting themselves, not putting in the wrong information. Turn off the news and the media, because they're just, I mean, I was a corporate communications major. I took courses on the mainstream media. There's, a class that I took where we talked about George Herbert Mead's theory of the mean world syndrome. I mean, this stuff has been known for decades. The more news that you watch, nightly news about this person was murdered and this happened, the worse that you actually perceive reality is. So I would highly encourage people to just really control the information they put in their brain, audit their thoughts every single day. I switched. I used to do transcendental meditation. I used to do mindfulness. Now I try to do meditation 15 minutes twice a day, where I just stop and I think and I audit my thoughts and I audit all the path that I'm on, the strategy that I'm doing, and think, what is this helping me achieve my goal, my wants, my wishes, hopes, desires, dreams, aspirations, or is what I'm doing actually hurting me? So I would encourage people to do that and better control the information that they're putting in their brain to get what they actually want out of life. Because I've learned, I think most people are their own worst enemies, and most people are holding themselves back. So I would focus on personal development. I used to think this guy, Tony Robbins, was like this scamster huckster when I was younger, but I've actually found out he's a really brilliant person. So look into personal development, and I think Tony Robbins could be helpful for people who want to improve.
Okay. So we'll move on very briefly to cryptocurrency. I say it's obviously been a very interesting day. Dogecoin going quite interesting places. I say this isn't by far from my own expertise, so I'll be even more incompetent than I was on longevity. But it is very interesting. So say that how long have you been involved in Bitcoin, or taken an interest in Bitcoin?
So as I was stating earlier, mortgage industry in 2007, 2008, and I just asked a lot of questions because I was right out of college at that time, and I saw people who had been in the mortgage industry for 10, 20 years that didn't know what the heck was going on, and it was so disruptive because all the regulations were literally changing on a daily basis. Regulations that had been in place for like years, or sometimes even decades, were just boom changing. Like, oh, can't do this, can't do that. People had to quit their jobs. It was 100% commission. So I started asking a lot of questions, doing a lot of research on the internet in 2007 and 8. And what it led me to is realizing that the whole system is just systemically and inherently insanely corrupt. And it's very different than what most people realize. We have a fractional reserve debt-based monetary system. So what that means is that the central banks and other institutions like investment banks, they can loan out money, lend money at fractions. And like, you can't do that. I can't do that. We don't have to get into all the details. The point is that these big institutions can do certain things in creating money in the way that they use money that you and I can't do as individuals. We would go to jail for doing these things. So that's not fair. Okay. That's not cool, and it's not fair. But the governments of the world do this. There's about 213 nation states on the planet. They use their central banks and their central banking practices and these laws to keep and enforce and even create even more power for themselves and their friends. This is the wealth inequality problem that we have. So because I already understood that stuff at a deep fundamental level, going down that rabbit hole, 2008 2011 or so, it led me into an environment on the internet where I could find and hear about this thing called Bitcoin. Now, unfortunately, I didn't get in like early enough. I tried to buy Bitcoin in 2012 and I literally couldn't. It was before Coinbase was created in 2013. And when I say I couldn't, I mean, I could have figured it out. I mean, I literally gave up. I
Yeah.
tried to, and I did Google searches. It wasn't apparent. There were no like buy Bitcoin here. There were no podcasts that I could find that were like, here's how you buy Bitcoin. Hook up, go to Coinbase and put in your bank account and your credit card. And then I heard this guy, Andres Antonopoulos, come on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2013. I was working at a company called Video at the time, VIDYO, a video conferencing startup in Silicon Valley. I had been a big Joe Rogan fan, early adapter to his podcast, which inspired me to kind of start mine and do my style of podcast similar to Joe's, just kind of like a conversation like you and I are having right now. And I saw this guy, Andres Antonopoulos, on Joe Rogan's podcast in 2013. I was like, this guy's brilliant. So that's when I got really interested in it. But then the market didn't do anything from like 2013 to 16. It traded sideways, like the whole cryptocurrency market. So then when it started trickling up in late 2016, early 2017, that's when I put like a lot of my personal money in, and I had made more money. I'd developed a plan in Silicon Valley to save and invest in. So that's really when I got in. And then I did a cryptocurrency vlog series in late 2017 on my YouTube channel where I explained all the fundamentals. A lot of these cryptocurrency people are explaining the recent news and this and that, but like I just tried to explain the fundamentals, like why is Bitcoin and cryptocurrency valuable? What is money? What's the evolution of money? What's the history of money? And why is this thing probably almost certainly not just going away and going to become more and more important in our society? So
Yeah.
that's kind of my background and history on it.
I mean, I saw because Bitcoin's obviously jumps around all the time, but um, I think it got up to I'm not sure exactly. I think it got up to about, was it $60,000?
It was
Then
about
fell back,
$65,000 a few weeks ago, I
and
think. Yeah.
then fell back a little bit, which was I'm saying I'm not sure the details, but I think there's some kind of crackdown on um, at the American end. I think Brazil banned it. Is that, have I got the
I I actually don't keep up with the cryptocurrency news very much because, like I was just saying, I focus on the long-term fundamentals of it. So Bitcoin is something that's called anti-fragile. So actually, the more governments like Brazil or China or whatever try and like ban Bitcoin, Bitcoin will just move to another government. And as I stated earlier, there's like 213 nation states on the planet, and there's actually even more micronations. So the point that I'm making here is that if all the governments together, like got together and said, let's all ban Bitcoin, that would probably hurt Bitcoin in the short term from a price perspective. But Bitcoin is anti-fragile. Bitcoin is like the honey badger of money. Bitcoin don't care. Bitcoin is just going to go somewhere where Bitcoin money goes where it's respected and protected. So Bitcoin would then go to a jurisdiction, country where somebody will take, all it takes is one, right? That's what people miss. People think that people think, Bitcoin will never go to $1 million a coin, or how could it go to $1 million a coin? Well, because look at the adoption. We don't even have, like, I don't know, 1% of the 7.9 billion people on the planet that have adopted the Bitcoin yet.
yeah.
So if we don't even have 1% adoption yet, and a lot of the old wealthy people haven't adopted yet, there's, I mean, so basically from my research, there's about 100 trillion. I did this research in 2017. There's well over $100 trillion of fiat currency in the world. And fiat currency is, all the money that people are most familiar with: the US dollar, the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan, the euro. So it's about 100 something $1 trillion of those fiat currencies combined. Bitcoin's at a current market cap of 1 trillion. So it can still 100x from that perspective. You have the global real estate market at, $200 trillion or so. But these numbers get really weird if all these fiat currencies are inflating rapidly and maybe even hyperinflating for some of them, as Bitcoin is actually inherently deflationary. So it's just a whole different system. Bitcoin is not a debt-based monetary system. In other words, it's not like corrupt from the beginning. I know that might sound harsh and people might disagree, but that's the way that I view it. It's open source. You can audit the code. If you are competent enough to know what you're doing, you can audit the Bitcoin blockchain and you can verify all of it yourself. So a saying in Bitcoin is don't trust, verify. We're tired of trusting these big governments, these big central bankers, because they don't deserve our trust, right? They are pathological liars. They've lied to us over and over and over again. If you had an individual, a friend, family member, or just a random person, a colleague, work colleague, who is just constantly lying to you on a pathological level, you should try and do everything possible to get away from that person. They are toxic. So if governments are doing the same thing too, we need a way to disintermediate them, to get away from them, to make them less relevant. And Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies are a way to do that. We need to get the government out of our money. So I think that just like we had the Protestant Reformation, and we, in Western civilizations hundreds of years ago said, you know what, when this whole religion and government thing combine as an institution, that's way too powerful for a mechanism to control people, because you're controlling, way too much of their perception and their way of life. And when we split those and said, no, church and state cannot actually, be combined in a power structure, that was very important for the development of the human species. And that's why these Western cultures who did those things and wrote it into their constitutions, like in America, it's a big reason why we thrived in
Yeah.
America. So I think in that same concept, if we remove the power of the government to coin money and create money and control the monetary supply, move that back into the free market through cryptocurrencies, as it had been for thousands of years through gold. Gold had been primarily used as thousands of years, and silver second. It was a free market. The government did not control it until very recently. That's the story that a lot of people don't fully understand. And it was in 1971 when Richard Nixon came on national TV in the US and said, we are, removing the United States dollar from the attachment of gold.
Yeah.
And that was a big, big thing, because then, if you look at the inflation, of course, this is what central bankers do. They're going to just, they're politicians. They're going to inflate the monetary supply, and they're going to give it to all their friends and enrich all their friends and become more and more corrupt, which is essentially what they've done over the last 50 years since 1971. So I know I just talked about a lot of stuff. Most people, might not understand what I'm saying, but, hopefully, James, you have an intelligent audience who can follow my train of thought. And even if you disagree with some of the language and the perspective that I'm saying, hopefully you can understand the high level that, like, Bitcoin's not going away, cryptocurrency is not going away. It's volatile in the short term, in the hours, days, weeks, months, and even maybe a couple of years. But over the long term, Bitcoin and the real, big cryptocurrencies like Ethereum, they're just going one way. They're going straight up, and they're going straight up for a reason, because it's the future of money.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that Bitcoin will replace gold? I mean, that's the argument you hear quite a lot. Is it going to become the new gold standard? Or could you eventually have currencies being pegged to Bitcoin in the way they used to be pegged to gold?
I'm not big on like predictions like that, just the same with like longevity, because
No, it's a horrible question, I know.
no, no,
I'm
it's not
pushing
a,
on that.
it's not a horrible question, James. It's actually a good question, because a lot of people want the answers, but I try to be like more scientific and, say basically, answer your question this way: based off the data and the track record of Bitcoin, I think that's highly probable that those things will happen. The timeline here is really difficult. Will that happen over the next year, 10 years, 100 years? I think it's more as I've gotten older and more life experience. I'm 36 now. I've realized that when I was in my 20s, I was more hopeful and naive to think that things happened quicker. And so things take a while to play out. These are big changes that we're discussing that are fundamental to how we behave as a global society with our money, something as important as our money supply and our way of life. So I think that these things play out over a longer period of time. And yeah, it'll happen in like inflection points with the way like cryptocurrency will like go up really, really fast and then like come down, and then like, maybe for a few years not do much, and then just have this wave again. So we're kind of in this bull market right now with cryptocurrency, where it's just continuing to go up.
I mean, just one final question. I'm kind of interested in whether you, because obviously you're very involved in cryptocurrency and with the longevity movement. I mean, do you see those as separate, or do you see them as sort of part of a combined attempt to remake human civilization?
Well, there's that old saying, the two things that are certain in life are death and taxes, right? I think most everybody who can speak English and is past the age of like, I don't know, 12 has probably heard that saying. So if you look at what cryptocurrencies and the healthy life extension, longevity, biorejuvenation movements, if you look at what they're trying to do, they're both just trying to chip away and hopefully even solve those two problems. Now,
Yeah,
the thing is with like solving death, you can never live forever. That's why I don't like to use that language of living forever, because
yeah,
you can never do it. You can never actually say, I've done it, I've lived forever, because another second will always pass by. It's not a scientific statement. But if you can work on these two problems of the easiest way to get wealth is to avoid taxes, right? To have some type of income and avoid taxes. So people are, as I said earlier, money goes where it's respected and protected. And as these governments, they're become more and more corrupt and big and bloated and just out of control, which most of the nation big governments, I believe, are. I believe they're insanely corrupt at levels that most people can't even fathom, with like inherent in the whole system. Like you might work at the Federal Reserve System, or you might work at one of these scientific institutions in a government, and you might not actually realize the history of this. So that's how that can happen, through something called compartmentalization, where like only the people at the top of an organization know the true like motives and the true like actual stuff that's going on, and you have all the people below who just like don't fully understand that. So that's how that can happen for people that don't realize it. But my point here of what I'm trying to say is that things can play out over a long period of time, but it might have little increments that change like much quicker and obvious for people. So I see things that way from a money perspective and a health perspective. So it's no surprise to me that people who are involved in cryptocurrency are much easier to understand and be excited about longevity, and vice versa, because these are already people who kind of recognize that institutions are lying to them and are corrupt in many ways. Our healthcare system is totally screwed up, like pretty much throughout the whole world. It's really bad in America. It's not even a healthcare system, it's actually a trauma care system or a sick care system. They don't do very much to keep you healthy. You have to take control of your life and your health. And so that's what we're trying to do at Longevity Plan. We're trying to give you more tools to take control of your own health. And cryptocurrency allows you to be your own bank in a way, your own Swiss bank, take control of your own finances and control your destiny. So financial wealth and health are the most financial wealth and physical health are the most important things, because they will allow you to do whatever else you want to do, any type of hobby or passion or travel the world, anything. If you have better health and more money, those things should help you do those things better. So that's why I focus primarily on those two things of health and wealth.
Well, so Brent, it's been fantastic to have you on. Really interesting across all the different topics we covered. I'll obviously put links to your YouTube and to the Lifespan News YouTube for my relatively modest number of subscribers. But hey, there may be some who don't overlap yet. But yeah, I can absolutely recommend subscribing to those. But yeah, no, so thank you very much. It's been really interesting.
Thanks so much, James. Appreciate you having me on, and hope you and your audience have a great day.